block after block, and today I'm going to show you how I made these Korok themed charcuterie boards based on Zelda Breath of the Wild. For this build I'm using Garappa decking cutoffs, and you can see me picking through the pile here trying to see which colors will work best. The first step in any build is to mill the lumber. I don't own a jointer, so my first step is to run it through the planer a few times, trying to get it as flat as possible. Once I have the boards relatively flat, I use my jointing sled to get a straight edge on one side. And while a jointer will give you a better result for the money, this is pretty great. Those are toggle clamps from Harbor Freight and a little bit of 1/2-inch ply. I'll include a link below to the video I followed to make it. Once you have a straight edge that you can reference, you run that along the table saw fence, cutting off the other side, and that gives you a parallel square board. You can see that I milled up way more wood than I needed for those 3 Korok boards. Reason being, you want to get the best joint, best grain match, best color match, so better to do more than less. Once you know which board you want to glue together, it's time to actually do the glue up. I use parallel bar clamps to keep them even and level and apply pressure on the outside of the joint. Then I use cheap Harbor Freight F clamps to keep the boards from buckling, and then I add a couple more F clamps in the middle to make sure there's pressure all the way across the joint. You can see that I'm using Type On 3. It's a charcuterie board. It's gonna need to be hand washed every now and then, so waterproof it is. I let the glue sit up for at least 3 hours. If you look at the bottle, it says a ½ hour, but better safe than sorry. The next step is to run it through the planer a few more times. Now that it's glued up, we want to get the whole panel as flat as possible. Then I took it to the miter saw to square up the ends. You could do this on a crosscut sled as well. I purchased the digital file from someone on Etsy. I'll include the link below. I edited it a good bit after the purchase just to make it work better with wood and an epoxy pour. You can see me carving it out here on my Inventables X Carve CNC. After the carve was complete, I mixed up some Total Boat high performance epoxy with medium hardener. I then added some black diamond pigment, I believe this one is jungle green, and poured it into all the voids from the carve. Once I was done pouring, I grabbed my heat gun. I made sure to go over the whole surface. I've had problems with air bubbles in the past ruining my finished product. I then let the boards sit for 4 days before continuing. I like to make sure the epoxy is totally cured before doing the next steps. Running it through the planer is what I like to do first. It's way faster than sanding, but sometimes you can get a bad result. It's just a little bit of a gamble, because sometimes the planer can cause the epoxy to chip out. After running it through the planer, I put a mitered edge on all sides of the boards. After doing the routing, I do a good bit of hand sanding to shape the corners. I don't like putting a routed edge. I like to kind of round it over myself and make sure, I like the edge and it's comfortable to hold. It's really important not to use the orbital sander on the edges that you routed. It's a quick way to ruin the work you had already done and get an inconsistent finish. So for all the corners and the edges, I make sure and hand sand throughout every grit. The next step is hours of sanding. So you do 80 grit, 120 grit, 180 grit, 220 grit, 320 grit, and 400 grit. That's my process when I do the epoxy poured boards. You can see me just doing one board here, sped up 5x, I believe. So it takes a good amount of time, but absolutely required to get a nice finish. After I get to 220 grit, I like to wet the boards and pop the grain, as it's called. And once you let it dry, the grain will rise and there'll be fibers. So when I do my 320 and 400 grit finishes, they'll be nice and smooth. You can see me doing the last grit of hand sanding here. Like I said, I do hand sanding on all the edges throughout the grits. It's really tempting to do the orbital sander, but in my experience, you'll regret it. So hand sand all the way through. After sanding, you're at the final step, which is finishing the boards. I like to use a mineral oil bath. I think it's the best finish for the amount of work. So I fill up a container, I put the boards in and let them soak for 12 hours before taking them out. Once they're done soaking, it's time to wipe them down. So you can see me doing one pass here, but throughout the next 24 hours, I do this at least 4 more times where I come back and wipe off the oil that's sweated out of the board. And this is Maisie. She decided to join in on the photo shoot. Thanks for watching. If this was something you enjoyed, please be sure to subscribe. And if you want to follow along more closely in the future, please be sure to follow me on Instagram as well. Thanks.